Well, a very, very happy Wednesday morning to everyone, and welcome to the John Kentera Show. We're on three platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and X. I want you to send your questions in. We got a bunch of questions from the last program we're going to air in Coach's Mailbag. We're going to take a look at the first two games. Padres split the first two games with the New York Yankees. They won a tight one on Monday night, and then they got blown out late in the ball game on Tuesday night. The rubber game tonight at Yankee Stadium. Dylan Cease going against left-hander Max Fried. We'll get into all that. Jackson Merrill's back with the Padres. We got a lot to get to today. But our leadoff hitter right out of the gate, one of my favorite guys. Love having him on because he has the pulse of not only the Los Angeles sports area, but he's got the pulse of Southern California and nationally. He's always got his eyes and ears open. Our good friend Dylan Hernandez, a great columnist for the LA Times, joins us on the John Kentera Show. I go, it's been a while, but it's great to have you on. And we got some games under our belt in the National League West. And, I think the two teams at the top, we kind of thought they were going to be there. But I want to start off different. Probably you've never had an interview like this before, where normally we talk about the top two teams. I want to talk about the Colorado Rockies. And I'm looking around baseball, Dylan. We got the Rockies. We got the White Sox from a year ago that lost 121 games. I watched the Pittsburgh Pirates last weekend. The Oakland Athletics now in Sacramento, just calling themselves the Athletics, are playing really good baseball, but it's been a while. Your thoughts on the Rockies and what is that franchise going to do to at least be competitive? Because right now they're not really competitive.
Yeah, and a lot of it is because they're not trying, right? And you can blame this on baseball's revenue sharing system where, the top earning teams kind of pay into this pool and teams, the low revenue teams get this payout at the end of the year. And so it kind of makes sense in some ways where they're kind of like, okay, well, if the owners don't want to spend money, one way to kind of make money without spending it is by fielding a garbage team, which is what the Rockies are doing here. And I think it's kind of one thing, right? If you were to kind of do this like occasionally, right? Okay, this is becoming, you do it. Okay, we can't compete this year, but it's going to be a once in a decade type thing while we rebuild. This kind of has become the norm now for the Rockies, right? And I think that, also when a lot of times when you have fans that leave, it's really hard to kind of get them back, right? Because once these seasons kind of start adding up, it really kind of adds to this kind of like stench of like loserness, right? And look, they do have this problem where, right, and this has always been a problem with the Rockies. They have trouble kind of attracting pitching into that market, because of the ballpark factors, right? Similar to the way the San Francisco Giants, even though they've been more successful, have had trouble attracting hitters, to their park because, right, it's going to be bad for their numbers and stuff. But yeah, they're like in a bad place here. I really just hate this stuff, because you talk about the Rockies, you talk about the Marlins, the Angels. I'm trying to think of who else fits in there. The Pirates, like you just mentioned. These are teams that just aren't going to spend, aren't going to be competitive, and it really does kind of skew the balance of the league, right? I really do think that winning 100 games today isn't the same thing as, was winning 100 games, 25, 30 years ago, right? Because at least back then, everybody had to put out like somewhat of a presentable product out on the field, and that's no longer the case.
I look at Buddy Black, and you know him, and I know him very, very well. And, he's still the head of the ship there. And you got to kind of wonder two things. Number one, why does he want to go into a season knowing that he has no chance to even finish in fourth place? And ownership obviously loves him and realize they've given him a bad product and they stick with him. And, to the fan base, I think that fan base is actually pretty good there in Colorado. They got a great ballpark. It's a very exciting area to walk around and go to a ball game at Coors Field. But man, it's just like a rudderless ship at the top right now.
Yeah, it really is, and I think right from the Rockies standpoint, kind of the value of having like a Buddy Black is that, he is like the person who the media interacts with the most, right? The manager speaks before every game, after every game. And, because of the way Black is, like it gives the organization this kind of air of class, frankly, that they don't deserve to have, right? I mean, it's a horrible organization. But because you see Bud Black all the time and you just kind of see like the way he carries himself, it kind of gives you this impression of like, oh, this is a classy organization, right? Because the guy we see all the time is classy. Yeah, but I think you're right about that. It's just, again, it's just kind of unfortunate because we've seen him manage competitive teams. I'd rather see him in a competitive situation than not. I mean, I think we get the most out of Bud Black that way, rather than just kind of be kind of here, honestly, is kind of like almost like a glorified PR guy.
I think that's very well put. Let's talk about the Arizona Diamondbacks. I know the Dodgers are going in there this weekend. The Diamondbacks, I mean, they haven't really gotten hot yet, but they're 19-17. They're kind of keeping, they're keeping in contact with the other three teams that have gotten off to fantastic starts.
Yeah, and I think the pitching, right, probably hasn't quite been where they want it to be. And I think if you look at the Diamondbacks and the Giants, it's probably the big separator between the two. Actually, the Giants, right, haven't, the offense has kind of been a little bit up and down, but they pitch consistently well. But yeah, you look at the Diamondbacks here, and you kind of think that, like, hey, they seem to kind of make a run at some point every year. I would assume that that's in them this year. And yeah, really, and I think this has kind of been talked about, right? The National League West is what the American League East used to be. The top teams always kind of drag everybody up. And I think, the Dodgers being here and kind of, right, they kind of got the whole thing started by going out and spending like crazy. Obviously, the Padres kind of followed, thinking, okay, if we want to compete with the Dodgers, we have to start spending. The Giants have been a little bit more careful. But it's not because of a lack of trying either. I mean, they've gone after Bryce Harper. They went after Shohei Ohtani. Again, it's just that they have trouble maybe attracting certain types of hitters to their park. But it has dragged the level of the entire, division up. And the Diamondbacks have done it a little bit differently, right? Mostly through kind of homegrown stuff. But yeah, I think, I wouldn't be shocked if any of the top four teams here, wind up on top when the season comes to an end.
Dylan, let me ask you this. I want to ask you about the Giants. I watched the Giants a few games prior to them coming to San Diego, and the Padres, they beat them in their brief 2-game set. And Padres, I thought that was an important series for the Padres just because they had the Giants in their home ballpark and the Giants were playing well. But this Giant team, your thought? Do you think they can stay in it for the duration?
Probably not. Just because of pitching depth, I think it's going to be a problem. I think if we look at the NL West for the most part, it's been a battle of attrition, right? And that's why the Dodgers win at the end. They just have the most bodies, And I'm not buying into this idea that the Dodgers are necessarily, smarter than the Padres or smarter than the Giants. They just have more money. And if you have more money, you can buy more players. And as guys start going down, you can just kind of plug in somebody else. And maybe, that doesn't necessarily translate to success in the playoffs, although it did last year. Again, over 162 game regular season, that is kind of the difference. You look at the Dodgers right now, again, Tyler Glasnow's down, Blake Snell is down. For any other team in the division, this would be fatal, right? You're probably looking at a month without these guys. I don't think Ohtani is going to pitch until after the All-Star break. Kershaw might be coming back, but I mean, he barely pitched last year. He's 37 now. We don't know what's there. For any other team, this would be kind of like a fatal situation. And, the Dodgers, again, they have the money and the bodies to overcome this. So you would just kind of expect that at some point this is going to kind of fall off. I do think, I think it's important to kind of note here that this team was, for the most part, built by Farhan Zaidi, right? And, last year they had a ton of injuries. It just kind of didn't work out for them. And I think that's kind of an example of what I was talking about, right? You get some key injuries and then all of a sudden your season's over. But he did kind of, assemble a pretty good team. Obviously, Buster Posey has come in and added some pieces. But, I think it's going to be hard to kind of keep this up over the course of a 6-month season.
I know they signed Willy Adames during the offseason. He's gotten off to a very, very slow start, probably putting a lot of pressure on himself, but it seems like he's a good team guy. I'm hearing a lot of good things about him. But it really, their PR campaign during the offseason was, we hired Buster Posey as the director of baseball operations and, the head chief cook and bottle washer. And that's been kind of the impetus behind this ball club.
Yeah. And I think maybe, in the case of Posey, what could be kind of important here is maybe what he didn't do, in terms of kind of going out for one of those, right, high-priced, free agent pitchers, which would have been kind of like an obvious thing to do in a way, right? But I do think, if you kind of go back to Buster Posey, the player, I mean, I think what kind of characterized him was the fact that, I mean, in addition to obviously being really good, was that he posted every day. And I think he values those guys, right? And, you can talk about, say, let's just take Blake Snell, right, who's with the Dodgers right now and on the injured list. That's a guy who, yeah, sure, he has kind of this high end, really high ceiling, but he might not be around all the time, right? And I really do think that if you kind of put a gun to Buster Posey's head and said, who would you rather have, Logan Webb or Blake Snell? I think he'd kind of rather have that Logan Webb, knowing he's going to be out there every 5 days. And so in some ways, I do think, excuse me, this team is kind of starting to kind of take on his character, right? And, again, over the course of this season, not just this season, but over the course of the next, 4 or 5 years, that will kind of serve as a proof of concept for his beliefs and what that looks like out on a baseball field.
Okay, let's get to our San Diego Padres down here. Fernando's off to a red-hot start. This pitching staff has been fantastic. The bullpen, the best in baseball. And last night, between Adrian Morejon and Wandy Peralta, they gave up 10 runs in the 7th inning against the Yankees, but they still have given up the fewest runs of relievers, and they've had to pitch a ton. Your thoughts on the Padres, Fernando, Manny, and the whole gang down here?
Yeah, I mean, I thought last year they were better than the Dodgers, right? They were the better team. The Dodgers just beat them, right? They won. As I'm sitting here, honestly, I'm just scrolling through the schedule right now, and it's like, so they don't play until June?
Yeah.
I mean, hopefully both teams are still there because the build up to this is going to be tremendous, right? And now this is becoming, one of these situations, obviously, where there's history now, right? There are memories on both sides, both fan bases. Have players they don't like on the other team now. And speaking of, kind of the thing that I talked about, earlier about the Giants, about what they didn't do. I was a big, one thing I was saying, I think I said this on your program too, right? That I was really hoping the Padres would re-sign Jerson Profar, just because of, again, right, all that, all the back and forth he had with the Dodger fans and the Dodgers. I thought that would have been great. And look, not re-signing him obviously turned out to be the right move, and so you really have to give the Padres credit, I think, also for that, right? What they didn't do, because it's easy to just kind of go out and throw money at your, kind of the high price guys. Excuse me. But, and that's going to allow them, maybe give them some flexibility even, kind of going forward, and given kind of the uncertainty that's going on with their ownership situation and stuff, these smart decisions, really pay dividends here, right? That's what's going to kind of keep them competitive with the Dodgers. One big bad contract that could really sink a team like the Padres. So I think you really have to kind of give the Padres credit for kind of being smart, this offseason.
I watched Fernando Tatis Jr. I've been watching him since his very first big league game. And, I get a smile on my face. The kid plays with a lot of joy. He's playing unbelievable baseball, really, on both sides of the ball. I know he got charged with an error last night, but, he's won a platinum glove, making that position change. That first year he wins the platinum glove in the National League. This year it seems like he's been a little bit more selective at the plate. He's wearing the baseball out right now. He's one of these guys. He's a 5-tool guy, first of all. Right. And anytime you go to the ballpark, you never know what this guy could pull off that night. I mean, he's absolutely amazing. And, the Padres had Juan Soto. They moved him. And I'm saying if Fernando could ever stay on the field for 145 games, and let's knock on wood, he can do it this year, the numbers this guy could put up could be video game numbers.
Yeah, and just a couple of years ago, right, we're talking about a player who was on the cover of like MLB The Show, right? I mean, this is, probably before Ohtani kind of became Ohtani, right? He was the guy that was kind of in line to kind of be the face of the game. And he's kind of showing why, right? It's kind of a very, like you said, it's a very kind of athletic, explosive style of baseball. And you kind of don't always, right? That combination of skill and athleticism isn't something that you see all the time, right? I mean, you're really talking about just kind of a handful of players here. Again, I love the act. especially from like an LA standpoint. He is the type of guy Dodger fans will hate, and again, Manny Machado, obviously, he has a different history with the Dodgers, so he's always going to get booed here. And look, and Tatis gets booed here as well, right? And I think that over the course of time, the better he performs, the louder those boos will be. And it's kind of like with the Barry Bonds thing, right? The louder he's booed, I think it's a sign of how well things are going for him. And again, I'm really excited about the series between the two teams this year, just because I think the Dodgers, for as much money as they spent and however much talk there was about, are they ruining baseball by being so good? They look pretty vulnerable right now, right? And so I really think that these two series that they're going to have, right, it's a home and home thing, right? I think it's Padres come to LA first, and then I think a week later the Dodgers go down there. I think these are going to be two electric series.
Yeah, I'm just sorry they don't play 18 times. I like when they matched up 18 times. Let me ask you this. Well, what's the real story? Why didn't the Dodgers want to re-sign Manny Machado?
Yeah, I think, I think they have kind of a certain idea of what they want their star players to look like in terms of, so far, like, look, the truth is, while Otani's like very likable, he's got his kind of own routine. Freddie Freeman, kind of the same thing. Mookie Betts has kind of maybe started to, I think maybe like in the last year or so, kind of taken this role as like a, voice in the clubhouse. But even he's got a bit of it, more of a kind of a reticent personality. I'm not really sure they want to deal with kind of big personalities. That's the impression that I've had. I know that when the current ownership came in, Kershaw was a guy in the clubhouse, right? And there were others that were, also guys in the clubhouse. And, frankly, they got questioned on a lot of things. And I don't think they want that too much, right? They want guys that can kind of plug in and kind of keep like a certain harmony, because with Manny, it goes both ways, right? I think, I read a couple of years ago when things weren't going well, Kevin Acee did some really good reporting, obviously, on Manny and what that season was like. And, I don't think it was like the most flattering portrayal, right? And, I think more than anything, it's just kind of the Dodgers don't want anything that's going to, because I think, again, they're an investment firm, right? And, it's kind of about, right, low risk, so to speak, I think is what they look at more than anything. And frankly, that's something I've been critical of that organization for a while. That I feel sometimes, it's like, okay, you make like one more trade, you're putting yourself in a really good position to win the World Series. And a lot of times they won't do it if the price isn't right, because they're viewing this as a long-term type thing. Okay, we just have to make sure we make the playoffs every year, because they view the, they view the playoffs as a crapshoot, and that if you're in enough times, you're going to win, right? And so I think with them, they're always very mindful of the floor. And, Manny Machado, for, good or bad, right? It could be either really good if he's going well and he's feeling good about things and he's willing to kind of take that leadership role in the clubhouse, or, when things aren't good, it could go bad. And I think that they were kind of more mindful of the bad side than they were optimistic about the high side.
Dylan, Clayton Kershaw, I know he's been working on getting back, and they're hoping to get him back here, around May 18th, I think, May 17th, 18th, if everything goes well. How important is he to the organization, even if he doesn't pitch? I mean, seeing him in that dugout, to me, seems to be kind of important to the Dodgers.
Yeah, I think like a lot of guys just really admire him, right? And right when they went to visit the White House last month, right, the guy that spoke on behalf of the team was Kershaw, which I think, and again, this is somebody that really didn't play a role in that World Series run, but I think it really kind of shows how much respect everybody has for him. I think back years ago, during one of these springs when, Yasiel Puig was around and nobody was, nobody knew where his head was. And I just remember, and I don't think this was a coincidence. I remember talking to Kershaw about Puig, and Kershaw said some really nice things about Yasiel at the time. And for the next week, I could swear to you, Puig was like a model citizen. And I think the two things were related, right? I think he was like really happy, like, oh, like Kershaw's like acknowledging me as like a real player, and I think that made him happy. I go back last year, heading into the playoffs, Kershaw was giving Yamamoto some pointers on the curveball, right? And so when Kershaw talks, they listen. right? And I think I think a lot of that respect, frankly, has come from the fact that, right, he's not just a guy who talks. Like, he's a guy that does, right? You get to the ballpark, and I'm, usually one of the first reporters, at Dodger Stadium. I'm paranoid, so I always get there early. And my lasting memory of just being on the beat is just seeing Kershaw running in the outfield every day when I got there. And so, I think the players getting to kind of see that and kind of connect that with the words that whatever he says, and they connect that to his accomplishments. I just think it overall has a really good impact on the team.
How you and Freddie getting along?
Great now. We obviously got off to a bit of a rough start, but I think look, and I still maintain what I said at the time. I still think he wanted it a little bit both ways, right? And this was obviously about his departure from Atlanta. Look, he could have stayed in Atlanta and taken less money, right? He had fewer years. That's a decision you make, and speaking of Kershaw, I mean, that's a guy, we could you could say, he probably has left as much money as Kershaw has made in his career. He's probably left money on the table, right? But I think his stance is always, just don't embarrass me. Pay me something fair. I'll take it. And, what you get in return for that is you get to spend your whole career with one team, right? And you get that kind of adoration from that fan base. And I just kind of felt at the time, it's like, well, you took the money and then you go back and you cry like it was you're some kind of victim here. You got to make that choice, but that said, since then, obviously, I think, he's a nice guy. I think I'm friendly enough, so yeah, we're getting along fine now. Whenever he sees me, he's one of those guys that kind of goes out of his way to say hello to everybody. So, it's hard, and look, I won't lie about this. He's always going to have like a soft spot now, probably in my heart, just because, last year, when the Dodgers made the World Series, right, through the BBWA, we're able to buy tickets at face value. And, my nephew is a pretty decent Little League player in the area. And, so he's into baseball right now. He was 11, at the time last year. And so I got him tickets to game 1, and that was probably to him, right? Seeing Freddie hit that home run was probably to him what, seeing Gibson hit, right, that home run in '88 was to me. And I just kind of remember, really just what when I think about it, right, in terms of like my life even and how I ended up here, that was a pretty significant event in my life, right? The Gibson home run. And I imagine, and I didn't even play baseball, by the way, right? And my nephew's like very much into baseball. So the fact that Freddie was able to kind of give him that moment, I think was really kind of cool. And, Freddie's talked about that a lot this year too, about just all the people that come up to him all the time. And it's like, hey, do you know what this moment meant to me? There was one guy, he said he met at the team's fan fest, who talked about how, he took his kids to the game, and he decided that like that day, he wanted to be present. So he didn't drink. Right. And he usually he was one of these guys that would usually just get hammered at the games, I guess. And after Freddie hit that home run, and here we were months later at this fan fest, and the guy told Freddie that he had not had a drink since that game.
Wow.
So again, it's, I think on one hand, Coach, obviously we're here in sports, and we kind of, right, there a lot of times you'll just kind of take these things for granted, but you do kind of forget sometimes like how much these moments, not just, bind people, how these moments kind of they mark time for a lot of people, right? Including ourselves. So I thought, that's really kind of a cool moment.
Very well put. Well, let's talk about the Angels. I took my grandson, he's 7 years old, and for his 7th birthday, he wanted to go to an Angels game. He wanted to see Mike Trout play, and Mike Trout did play, and he played rather well. He had a hit and stolen base that day. And the Angels actually won the ball game, which was kind of nice. But when you're watching the Angels play right now, what are you seeing? And where's this franchise headed down the road?
Yeah, I don't think they're headed anywhere, right? They're kind of just stuck spinning their wheels. And it's really unfortunate, in a way, because, look, I don't, what is kind of, good, I think, right, about Artie Moreno's philosophy is that Artie doesn't want to do the rebuild thing, right? He is very specifically, we are not tanking, Now, The problem is that they're just kind of stuck right now, right? They're at least they are until probably Rendon's contract comes off the books. I think he's
But
got
what a
another.
disaster that's been.
Right. And so, you kind of once you kind of have these big contracts on your books and you're not positioning yourself to get high draft picks, well, how exactly are you going to build your team? And that's kind of where they're stuck right now, right? And so because of Trout's contract, because of Rendon's contract, they're kind of stuck, signing, guys like Yusei Kikuchi, right? Who's like a perfectly serviceable guy, but you don't want Yusei Kikuchi to be your big offseason acquisition either. And so they're just kind of stuck there, and look, I'm going to be honest though. The one thing is, I remember, when I was in high school and I had no money, my friend and I used to go to watch Clipper games at the sports arena, and it would cost nothing to get in. And then late in the game, some usher would come up and, hey, do you guys want to go down on the floor because nobody's there? I do think that there is value for kind of having like if in a multi-team market for one of the teams to be kind of crappy, right? Because look, I think Angel Stadium is like the experience, and I understand that's not a sustainable thing there. They got issues with the plumbing and stuff that are going to have to be addressed. But like as of right now, to me, it's a great ballpark experience. The Dodgers offer one thing, right? The Dodgers offer this kind of excitement and hey, I'm here. But what comes with that are really crowded concourses and food lines that kind of like it takes forever to get your food, and the parking situation is a nightmare. I mean, Angel Stadium, you can get through those parking things like quicker than you can like to drive through a Jack in the Box.
And it's
right?
$20 to park. It's not like
$20
50 or 70. And
yeah,
I got in. Seriously, I paid $20 to park, and I was like in heaven. And my daughter bought the tickets, and we're sitting in the upper deck, and I'm going, how much do these tickets cost? I figured, $40, $44 like they're at Petco. They were $12.50.
yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. It's like so it's kind of this affordable thing. You don't have to worry about again, like you're right. If it's a team that's like in a hyper competitive type thing, sometimes like the fans will kind of get into it too much. And, next thing you know, there could be like a fight. So you always have to kind of keep an eye around you. Angel game, you don't have any of that, right? If you want, you can just take a whole row of seats to yourself. And I think that there's a place in the market for that, right? I mean, I'm not going to lie. Again, my kids, neither of my kids like likes baseball really. They've seen games at Angel Stadium. They still haven't gone to Dodger Stadium, right? Because I can't justify. My kids don't even really like the sport. I'm not going to pay, $400, $500, $600 to take a family of four, to the ballpark. And so the Angels to me offer kind of this like nice, like alternative option that I think again is great for the market. It's unfortunate for those fans, obviously, that they're kind of stuck there. And I would, like anybody else, like love to kind of see Mike Trout in October. I'm not sure we're ever going to see that happen, honestly. But again, like if somebody has to kind of bear that burden of being a star on a bad team, I mean, what better guy than Mike Trout? I know he's not maybe the most like colorful of quotes, but I'll say this, every time I've gone to talk to Mike Trout, and I leave his locker as I'm leaving, I'm like, wow, what a nice guy, and you feel kind of right. And then I'll look at the quotes later and I'm like, man, he said nothing. But there's a certain warmth that he projects, right? I mean, he's always out there signing autographs for kids. He's great with stuff like that. I remember years ago, I asked him just kind of if he was frustrated, about, being on the sidelines in every October. And I just remember he was like really happy that day. And I'm like, why are you so happy, right? It's another crap season for you guys. And he told me, look, I get to play baseball for a living, I get to come to the ballpark and like I don't have to have like a real job. I get to play baseball every day. And I just think that that's really great perspective, right? Because you can sometimes kind of get lost in what you don't have. And here's somebody who appreciates what he does have. And I think, again, I think that because of that, the fan base kind of loves him here. I imagine at some point they will do a Matthew Stafford for him, where right, similar with Stafford on the lines. It's like, hey, I want to try winning once. Could you please trade me? I could see maybe that happening towards the end of his career. But, as of right now, if somebody kind of has to carry that flag of being the star in a bad team, I couldn't think of better of a guy than Mike Trout.
Dylan, I want to ask you about what you do as a columnist. You've been a columnist now for a number of years, and you were very, very well established in the LA market. And, I think nationally people knew who you were even before you became a columnist. Has your job become And I know because you are com, you get a few more perks as far as being able to get to certain players that maybe a standard writer couldn't get to. But when you look at the broad base of the media covering professional athletics now, is it become increasingly more difficult for writers to get information and get access to these players and develop relationships?
Oh yeah, for sure. The first of all, I guess just the teams just have so much more control now, right? And I think we have to kind of go back to the beginning in terms of like, okay, why do we have access to begin with, right? It's because the owners of the teams figured out that if the players talk, right, and whether what they say is positive or negative or whatever it is, it's something that goes in the paper, um, which then gives fans things to talk about, right? And the more you talk about it, the more important it feels, and the more likely people are to either pay money to go watch a game in person or to watch it on TV, which obviously increases ad revenue. Now teams kind of have their own in-house media, right? I mean, you go to any NBA arena, guys are kind of walking into the arena and there's like a camera in their face, like, hey, what are they wearing today? You know, and so I think teams feel they can kind of control the message a lot more, and they can do so while like not kind of compromising the amount of content that's out there, right? If anything, there's probably more content now out there than there's ever been, and so I do think that there's less, kind of like the teams aren't as like eager to like push players forward. You look at baseball, right? Our access time has been cut significantly, before, right? So the home team takes batting practice first. So usually they would open the clubhouse before batting practice. And then we were back in the old days, we were able to go in after batting practice. Well, that second window is gone now, right? You look at a lot of these stadiums now, and I would just use baseball because baseball to me has always had the best access, right? Compared to any other sport. I think it's because there's a Baseball Writers Association that picks the MVPs and stuff. And because history is such a big part of the game, the commissioners always work very closely with the baseball writers. They kind of go out of their way to help us, I think, compared to the other sports. But even there, right, all these stadiums now have these like subterranean worlds down there, right, that are connected to the locker room. Before, if you weren't hitting in the batting cages or eating, well, there wasn't anywhere really to go outside of your locker. You had to just sit there. Now they have like sleeping rooms, quiet rooms, weight rooms, everything. Hiding rooms. Yeah. So, yeah, I do think it's harder, and, also I think teams have kind of figured out that like, because before, again, I think, had this been like 40 years ago, some high ranking executive from the Dodgers wants to let people know what's going on. Why didn't they make this trade? What really happened? Why did they let that guy go? Usually that would go to like the local reporter, right, at the biggest paper there. Now I think because of the internet and stuff, now it's national, right? The audience is national. So, it's easier to go to a, Ken Rosenthal or Jeff Pass and these guys who have like national platforms. And that also kind of gives, I think, these GMs and right agents like plausible deniability. Obviously, if the local guy gets it, well, you probably got it from the team, right? Whereas here now, everybody kind of has some deniability, and so that kind of I think the initial, right, kind of like what you would usually do as a younger beat writer in terms of kind of developing sources and breaking news here and there. Yeah, that process for sure has gotten harder. One thing I always said about covering baseball. I did the beat. I think I covered the Dodgers for 7 or 8 years. What I did like about it was, I always told people, look, you have a bad day, you can come back the next day and get something that nobody has, right? Baseball is the one sport, I think, where you can have something in your story that nobody else has just by virtue of time, because there's so many players, right? There are 25 players that all kind of matter. And you could get something as long as it's just a matter of how many people, how hard are you willing to work? That will be reflected, in your output. And now, again, you go into the locker room before a game now, there might be 2-3 guys there. And it's kind of the same 2-3 guys all the time. So I do think it's just harder to get information in general. At least with the Dodgers, they don't give access to the coaches, right? You have to basically set an appointment, right? And in which case, like the coaches know, like, okay, the team knows that I'm talking to the reporter, right? I've never even met the trainer of the Dodgers. I have no idea who the trainer is right now. I can't even name the guy. I have no idea what he looks like, nothing. I've never seen this guy. And again, like those, right, the fact that teams have cut down on scouting, right? I mean, those guys were, you know, maybe not necessarily the most accurate sources of information, but they were sure, they told great stories, and you would see them kind of in the back of the dining room all the time. And you would have, now on a good day, right? This is like right before the playoffs, you might see like 3 scouts together, whereas before it was, they had 2 full tables before, right? And so, yeah, the game has just kind of changed a lot in that way. It has become, kind of the personal touch of these things, and the great characters that we talked about. We used to talk about. I know scouts with 10 million Marriott points, and right, and that kind of like became like a big part of their personality. Like all those guys are kind of gone, right? Those guys that you always kind of like, oh, I can't wait to go to the city to see that guy. Yeah, that part of it's gone, and so it is a lot different now.
I remember, whenever, the Dodgers would come to town, Lasorda would always show up, and he was always putting on a show, even in the press box or the elevator, okay?
Yeah.
But the other guy that always had people gather around him when he came to a press box, very similar to Lasorda, was Jim Fregosi, who's my all-time favorite Angel player, by the way, number 11. And he had a great career with the Angels and got traded to the Mets and finished, I think, with the Pirates. But I mean, when those guys would come to the press box, man, it was like going to church.
Yeah, and I really miss those kind of, and you kind of go back, right? You asked something earlier about kind of like Manny Machado and kind of what happened with the Dodgers there, and it does feel like, if you kind of don't color between the lines now, so to speak, right, you're not going to get a shot. Like I find it really hard to imagine Tommy Lasorda in today's baseball getting a chance to manage a baseball team, right? It's just like they would think, oh, because the thing is, right, there's so much money in the game now that winning has become, right, and frankly, it does make a huge difference in revenues, right? I mean, the Dodgers winning the World Series and not, I mean, it changes everything. And so, teams understandably are very kind of protective of their information. And, a guy like Tommy who would just tell you whatever, the front office would probably view that guy as a liability now, Now, from my perspective as somebody who spends a lot of times at ballparks, I mean, I miss Tommy, man. It's funny because as I was talking earlier, that was one of the guys that I was thinking of. Like, I really miss Tommy, and
he was a comedian, really.
Yeah, look, and he wasn't the perfect human being, and occasionally he would do things that kind of made you go, huh. But he was a character, and those characters are just kind of gone now, right? They're slowly kind of, and the one great thing about the Dodgers is they've always done a pretty decent job of like kind of keeping these guys around. But kind of beyond a certain point, the Tommies, even Vince Scully, I would even throw right in his own way, was a character, right? Obviously, if you got to know him, he was a really funny guy. Fernando Valenzuela, even though he was kind of quiet, he kind of had his own. These guys all had very distinct personalities, and they were kind of unapologetically themselves. And that is, to me, kind of one of the parts of the game that I miss when I compare now to back to when I started covering this stuff.
As we're talking about the Dodgers and some of their different personalities, have you ever had the chance to sit down and talk with Sandy Koufax? And if you have, well, what's he like?
So he started showing up. I think it was after like Bernie Madoff stole his money, right? And then the new ownership came in. He started showing. I think he had some kind of agreement with the team. I'm not exactly. They gave him like a special advisor role or something, and he would usually kind of come in and out of camp without really saying much. And one day I just see him in the clubhouse, and I'm like, yeah, screw it. Like, let me try to go talk. I mean, he's here. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? So I remember I go to talk to him, and I think we were talking about Kershaw. This is, when Kershaw was kind of becoming Kershaw, and no, he was just kind of very nice and very soft spoken. And, what was interesting about that was that every year after that, he started talking regularly, like once a spring, basically, and I just kind of remember he was talking about, I asked him about Puig and, where his like throwing arm ranked and stuff, and obviously he said, oh, he's not quite Clemente, but I just remember the way he said it was, something about how Clemente never overthrew the cutoff man. Right. And it was kind of this very subtle way of kind of calling Puig an idiot without calling him an idiot, And I just thought that was like very kind of classy, right? I mean, that's one thing, because I kind of don't have that. I'll just say it, Well, obviously, like one guy is an idiot and the other guy was a savant, um, you know. But I just kind of remember him saying that. What was kind of interesting was I just remember, this is kind of a random story about Koufax, and I believe he went out to dinner with Kershaw one time, and because he and Kershaw developed a very close friendship, and they went out to dinner, and like in the month that followed, I noticed like these cases of this particular Pinot Noir that you can frankly find at like any supermarket, right? This isn't like, we're not talking about anything like super high end here. Like this $15 bottle, and the players had it by like the cases. And I asked him about it, and I asked one of the players who had made one of these orders about it, and he had told me basically that was what Koufax ordered at that dinner with Kershaw. I guess Kershaw told everybody. So then next thing you know, this thing kind of became a thing on the team. So yeah, there, and that to me is like one of the cool things again about baseball, right? It's because of the history. There is this like reverence for the past that you might not quite have like in other sports. I know obviously like in the NBA, there's this kind of this whole discussion of, how many points would Giannis have scored in the 70s, or Michael Jordan played against a bunch of bums or whatever, right? There's a certain kind of attitude, I think, maybe in basketball of like almost like denigrating the past a lot of times, whereas I think in baseball, there is this kind of reverence for the past that I think is really nice.
Well, I got news for you. Giannis wouldn't score as many as you think, because back in the 70s, he'd be trying to score without a head attached to his shoulders going down the lane. I guarantee you that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because, again, my son's like a soccer player, and so we're always talking about Messi and Maradona, and I tell him like, no, like Maradona played like a different sport, right? I mean, they were trying to, if you did that to Messi, you get red carded in 5 minutes. Like you couldn't do these things, So yeah, and it goes the opposite way too, right? Where I think, I think while there is some of that, my dad is obviously kind of this old school baseball fan who wants to see, this guy hits a home run, next guy should get a ball to the head. He's one of those types, but
well, at least the rib cage.
Yeah, but I think for the most part, though, right? I still think even like the players of the past kind of look at the, I visited with Ron Say not too long ago, and I just remember just the respect that he had for like the modern player, talking about, hey, I mean, everybody throws 100 now, right? It's incredible what these guys do, and I think so. The respect I really do think kind of goes both ways, and a lot of it is because the history is so rich. Players today understand that they're making all this money because of the guys that came before them, right? The guys that came before are the ones that kind of built the stage on which they're performing. And, in baseball, I think that the players haven't lost sight of that.
Dylan, I've kept you far too long. I was going to get into the Lakers, but we'll table that. We'll do that next time. It's going to be a long off season after that first round exit. But as always, thanks, and continued success, and hope the family continues to ride the straight and narrow, and the kids get out of school and have a great summer.
No, thank you so much, Coach. I know I've told you this a million times, but I used to listen to you as a kid. And so to me, getting to do this is like something I dreamed of doing as a kid. So every time I get to do this, the child in me kind of wakes up a little bit, and it gives me an appreciation for what I get to, what I have the opportunity to do right now. So thank you so much for having me on.
It's always a pleasure. Always really enjoy having you on. I appreciate you have the time to do it. You be well, and we'll stay in touch.
Okay, sounds good, Coach. Take care.
There you go. Dylan Hernandez, great columnist for the Los Angeles Times, trying to give you an update on the NL West and the Angels. And, man, can you imagine talking to Sandy Koufax? I mean, I've talked to a lot of guys. I talked to Bob Gibson before. I told you the Bob Gibson story. I've talked to a lot of Frank Robinson, talked to a lot of Hall of Famers. Duke Snider used to be a big listener to my program. But, man, Sandy Koufax, just seeing him at those Dodger games, I mean, it's amazing. He looks great, but man, I can only imagine getting an opportunity to talk to Sandy Koufax. Okay, we're going to get to questions here in a minute. So if you got questions, Coach's Mailbag, get ready. But, briefly here, I'm not going to belabor what happened on Tuesday night. I will talk about that great win on Monday night. Manny coming up, drilling a a 2-run base hit to get the Padres on the board, and then Xander Bogaerts right after that against Luke Weaver, banging the first pitch he saw for a 2-run single. Padres won that ball game 4-3. Nick Pivetta, I thought another good outing. 5 innings, 5 hits, 3 runs, 2 earned runs. The only real bugaboo for me in that game for Pivetta was he walked 4, did have 5 strikeouts, gave up a home run to our old buddy Trent Grisham, but nonetheless, Padres will win that ball game 4-3. And then last night, oh my goodness gracious, they were going great. And their bullpen, this is going to happen. Over 162 games, this is going to happen. They had a 3-2 lead going to the 7th, and things fell apart. I mean, Michael King, 6 innings, 3 hits, 2 earned runs, 2 walks, 2 strikeouts, gave up that home run opposite way to Aaron Judge. But Padres had a 3-2 lead. Fernando, the RBI double, and man, Fernando continuing to get it done. But Morejon had a rough night. He gave up 3 earned runs. Actually got charged for 4, and then Wandy Peralta went 2/3 of it and gave up 6 earned runs. His ERA climbed to 5.14. Morejon's up to 3.57, and the Padres get beat 12-3. And today they got Dylan Cease, who's got a 1-2 record right now and has had just a miserable start to his year, going against Max Fried, who's 6-0 and a 1.01 ERA. The other thing about Dylan Cease, not only is he only 1-2 with a 5.61 ERA, he'll be making his 8th start. In his prior 7, he's only had 1 quality start. I mean, they got to get this guy on track. If the Padres want to go where they want to go, they've got to get this guy on track. They're going to get Yu Darvish back before too long, I believe, unless there's no setbacks. But they got to get Dylan Cease. This would be a big win. Padres had won 6 straight. You win this, you win the series. You get an off day on Thursday in Colorado. And then you got Friday, Saturday, Sunday against the worst team in baseball. You go in there, you spank them in your home ballpark, go in there, have an offensive explosion and spank them 3 games and get back on Monday night to take on the Angels. You get by today. You win today's ball game. You got a chance to really go on a roll against the Rockies and the Angels. And we'll see how the Padres are able to play it. Now, they get Jackson Merrill back on Tuesday night. And what's he do? First time up, boom, a double. Ended up with 2 hits. Back at it. And this works out perfect. I told you what was going to happen. I told you on Monday's podcast what was going to happen. They'd get Merrill to New York. They got him to New York. He went through all the running and swinging the bat and getting checked out by the trainers. They gave him an off day after playing Saturday in the outfield, and Sunday is the DH in San Antonio. I told you he'd be there on Monday, but they wouldn't activate him till Tuesday. That's exactly what happened. Now he'll play again tonight, as long as he came out of last night's game fine, and I think he was. So he'll play today, and then they get an off day tomorrow, and then they'll probably play him. I don't know if they'll play him all 3 games in Colorado. They may DH him one game. That's what my call is. He'll play center field at least 1 game, if not 2, and the other game he'll DH. That's what I would do. But they need a big performance out of Dylan Cease and going against Max Fried. Max Fried, I got to be honest with you, I love watching great pitchers. And Max Fried, I've always had an affinity for left-handers. That's why I was asking about Koufax. And a lot of it had to do, I think, when I was a college baseball coach, I had a lot of really good left-handed pitchers, a lot of guys that ended up signing professional baseball contracts. And there's something about left-handers I just love. But Max Fried is a great guy to watch. But you know what? Padres could have success against him. He's pitched well in his career against his old ball club. Remember, he was a first-round draft pick of the Padres once upon a time and got traded to Atlanta. So, hey, at the end of the day, Padres are still playing great baseball. They had a blip in the radar last night. They get beat 12-3. And when you're playing great ball clubs, the Yankees are a great ball club. I don't know if they can get back to the World Series and win it, but they're one of the great ball clubs present day. They can turn it around on you in a hurry. And Austin Wells, a kid out of Bishop Gorman High School in Vegas, saw him play several times, actually, when he was in high school. They came to San Diego for a tournament. I was at every one of his tournament games watching him. And great young player. Went to Arizona and got to the big leagues very, very quickly. The guy can flat out swing the bat. Not hitting for much of an average, but he's got big-time power. I think he'll end up being a pretty nice major league hitter, but he hit a grand slam as part of that 10-run uprising in the 7th inning. So I laid it on the line. We could talk about, who had hits, who didn't have hits, but I want to get to your questions. Let's get to our coach's mailbag and all our questions. And thanks again to Dylan Hernandez from the LA Times for joining us today. Okay, let's roll them. Drive for show and putt for dough. Cease looks lost out there. He needs to find his inner bulldog. King and Pivetta pitch with intensity and anger. Cease looks too passive out there. Drive for sure. I'll tell you what. To me, he loses concentration, and he's got to bow his neck a little bit. You got to be tougher out on the mound. I mean, he wears his emotions on his sleeve. I know when things are not going well. That's what we've talked about with pitchers over the years. And I always go back to Fernando Valenzuela when he pitched for the Padres, and he had absolutely nothing. He had nothing left in that left arm, except he had a lot of confidence, and he had a big heart, and he was smart as a whip, pitching-wise. He knew how to get certain guys out. He was able to read guys' swings and throw a ball intentionally out of the strike zone. He'd put guys on the old unintentional, intentional walk to get to that young left-handed hitter who he could get out on his front foot to get roll over and hit into a 4-6-3 inning-ending double play. I saw it over and over and over. But Dylan Cease, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, and I don't think my thought process will change, even if this guy ends up going on just an incredible streak. If I had to pick right now, and if I had to have picked at the end of last year, if I could sign one guy, whether it was Michael King or Dylan Cease, no brainer for me, it's Michael King. Every day of the week on twice on Sundays. Dylan Cease does not, to this point, and I don't know if he's 29 years of age. I don't know if he doesn't have the mental makeup out on the mound that I would personally like to see. He doesn't exude confidence out on the mound. Even when you're getting beat up, don't show that you're getting beat up. And when you're pitching well, don't walk around with a smile on your face. Be the same guy. And I realize everybody's got to be who they are, but his mound presence doesn't lend well for me when he's not pitching well. And then you can tell the frustration goes into his delivery. He tries to throw harder. His ball loses command. It straightens out. It's up in the zone. And then his other stuff just goes awry. They need a big effort out of him tonight. I mean, I would imagine Mike Shildt, Ruben Niebla have got to be very, very, number one, disappointed, but also concerned. When can they get this guy back on track? And by the way, I got to mention this. Mike Shildt, that was a good argument. I thought that was a really good argument by Mike Shildt. Is it one of the greatest arguments I've ever seen? No, but considering he doesn't really argue all that much, that was his 15th career ejection. He dropped his lineup card, took his glasses off, tossed them over on the grass, and he gave Adrian Johnson all he could handle. And I thought at one point he might bump him, and then he's going to get a suspension. I'm anxious to see what Major League Baseball does on this. They'll probably give him a fine. I would hope that he wouldn't get a one-game suspension. And then Fernando got tossed out. That's his first career ejection. I thought Fernando handled it pretty well. That pitch was a strike that he didn't like. It was a low strike, but it was a strike. And then he swung at a bad ball out of the zone and just walked back to Adrian Johnson. And I don't know what he said, but whatever he said got him ejected. But I thought it was kind of classy on Fernando's part. He didn't stand in the box and start barking at him. He just walked back and whispered in his ear, and then Adrian threw him out of the ball game. And Mike Shildt was on him all night long. Mike Shildt was not happy with Adrian Johnson. Of course, that goes back to last year when he got kicked out. And I'm not sure Adrian Johnson kicked him out last year. It might have been the home plate umpire. Adrian Johnson's the crew chief, and he came in, I think, from first base last year. And then Shildt gave Adrian Johnson an earful at Petco Park. But, I kind of like those old school arguments, the Bobby Coxes, the Lou Pinellas, the Billy Martin of yesterday, Dick Williams. I mean, those arguments were great. Even Lasorda we were talking about earlier. That's good stuff. Okay, Drive for Show. I hope I answered that for you. Shannon, we need to put Tatis in bubble wrap. My heart jumped out of my chest on that forearm hit. His self-generated run was a thing of beauty. Thanks, Coach. Another gem. Shannon, thank you very much. Everybody knows how I feel about Fernando. I just won 145 games. We get 145 games next year during the offseason. We're going to turn over when the new baseball cards come out, and we're going to have a smile on our face. And we'll have a smile on our face at the end of the year. Like Dylan Hernandez said, he thought the Padres were better than the Dodgers last year, and most people around baseball thought that. We let them off the hook. And can you imagine those games at Petco and Dodger Stadium? Oh my goodness gracious, they're going to be crazy. But yeah, he's a one-man wrecking crew, and he showed it on Sunday in Pittsburgh. And Shannon, hopefully, just stay healthy. I was really worried. I knew he probably wouldn't play the next day when he got hit on Friday night, but he did. I thought he'd be out Saturday, come back maybe Sunday or maybe not, and just show up at Yankee Stadium. But they were able to, get that swelling down. Man, that was a big egg. It's like when you get hit in the head with a baseball and that egg pops up on your head right away. That's what happened to Fernando's arm, the old hematoma. But they were able to get it down. I'm sure they worked around the clock until the next day to get him ready to go. And then they put that pad on. And even with that pad, that had to be a little bit sore and stiff, I would think. And he's probably still a little bit sore there, but you know what? He's playing well. I know he didn't have a great series offensively in Pittsburgh, 1-for-9, but you know what? He won that one ball game with his double, and then he stole third, and then he ended up coming up on that short pass ball that got away from Joey Bart. But Shannon, thank you very much for the nice comments as well. Very much appreciate that. Shepard, we definitely have the best fans. I noticed how the Pirates look like they can't give away tickets. Must be a bummer for teams to come to Petco. No, I think good athletes, they like to play in front of people to showcase their skills. And I know when I was playing college basketball and we get good crowd, I didn't care if we were playing on the road. I never really thought much about that. I knew it was tougher on the road because the officials are going to probably, side with the home team a little bit more than you. But it all works out in the wash. I remember my college basketball coach, my freshman year, when I was playing JC ball before I got to 4-year ball. He said, "Hey, before the ball ever's thrown up at center court, you're down 10-0 when you're on the road." And I've always remembered that. And I think that was probably a pretty good call by Skip Enger, the old coach at Maricosta College, basketball coach. But I think great athletes, they like to play and showcase their skills in front of people, whether they're yelling for them or against them. I don't think it really bothers them. But you know what? Coming to Petco, I think a lot of guys get energized coming to Petco because they love playing in front of a lot of people, and there's always commotion going on, unless you're the Dodgers, and the Padre fans never let up for 9 innings. The Padre fans, man, they just wear them out. And they did that in 2022. I talked about that last week on the podcast. Dodgers figured, once the game got going on, second, third inning, everybody, sit back in their seats, drink their beer. And it didn't work that way. They wore the Dodgers out in that series in 2022. But Shepard, thank you very much for that. Very much appreciate that. Good question. We'll keep other questions rolling in. 02RR with Hayward struggling. Do you think Wade should get more starts in left field? You know what? That's an interesting call. I'll tell you what. I was looking last night at the numbers with Jason Hayward, and of course he just came back. He had that knee inflammation, but I'm looking at Hayward. He's hitting 196. Did have a sac fly last night for an RBI, and then I look at Tyler Wade, 1-for-2, hitting 292, and he can run better than Jason Hayward. I don't know. That's a very interesting call. I don't know if Mike Shildt would make that move. I don't know if he'd make that move. But that's not a bad call. You know what? Tyler Wade, and people are saying with Cronenworth, and oh, by the way, Cronenworth, let me get that to you too, because we got a lot to get to still. I started his rehab assignment last night, went 1-for-2, 3 walks, hit a 2-run homer, scored 3 runs, and struck out 1 time. So a good night for Jake Cronenworth. 1-for-2, 3 walks, a 2-run homer, 3 runs scored, and a strikeout. And they're saying he could join the ball club as early as Friday. So again, play tonight. Have Jake play tonight. fly into Colorado. You get an off day tomorrow. He gets a little rest. And then bingo, he's in the lineup on Friday night. And then who's going to go down? Will it be Brandon Lockridge? Would it be Tyler Wade? Would it be Oscar Gonzalez? I would think it would probably be Oscar Gonzalez. You can't send Wade down, and Lockridge doing a good job. I know he doesn't hit much, but man, that guy plays a good outfield, got a good throwing arm as we saw when he threw that runner out at home base in the Pittsburgh series. And he gives you good competitive at bats. I don't have a problem with Brandon Lockridge. In fact, he's kind of grown on me a little bit. But that's a very good call, O2RR. With Hayward struggling, do you think Wade should get more starts in left field? Be interested to see if Mike Shildt would do that. That's a good question. I like that. All right, what else we got here? Okay, the rubber game. I mentioned it tonight at 4:05. Dylan Cease, 1-2 in a 5-6-1 going against the left-hander Max Fried, 6-0 in 7 starts this year and a 101. And then remember, we're going to be back in on Friday as well, but I want to get you those National League West standings. Dodgers got beaten walk-off fashion on Tuesday night. They had an opportunity in the top of the 10th, but good defense by Miami. They got to the bottom, and Miami got a walk-off hit, beat the Dodgers 5-4. So with the Padres dropping their game to the Yankees and the Dodgers losing, we're right where we were before we started the beginning of the week. Dodgers at 24-12, a half-game lead over our 23-12 Padres. The Giants playing good baseball right now, a game and a half back at 23-14. Arizona starting to slowly work their way back after a slow start, 19-17, 5 games back. And then our Colorado Rockies at 6-28, 17 games back already. My God, unbelievable. And they're even 13 and a half games back in the wild card. Padres are the number 1 team in the wild card right now. How about that? So we got some things going here. Just get to the playoffs, get Cease on track, keep King healthy, keep Pivetta healthy, and let's get Darvish back, and that'll just deepen the rotation. So some good stuff on that. We got any other questions? Any other questions at all out there? If you've got them, there we go. Doozer Chris, Coach, do you ever get a chance to see Matt LaChappa pitch? I'm an El Cap alumni. Well, I'll tell you what. I was actually out at El Cap a week ago. I know the head coach there, Alan Strong, good guy, pitched at Santana, was a pitching coach a year ago at Point Loma, but spent 5 years in pro ball. I saw him pitch at UNLV. His pitching coach at UNLV was Greg Maddox. And so I told Alan Strong, first-year head coach out at El Cap, I go, I'm going to come out and see you play. But because my granddaughter plays beach volleyball on Tuesday and Thursdays for Torrey Pines, I had a hard time getting out there. But I went out there a week ago. Yesterday. Grossmont, Joe Musgrove's team, high school team, against El Cap. And both teams take infield. The music's playing, the concession stand. I bought some nachos. They had Teacher Appreciation Day, and the umpires didn't show up. So I drove all the way to Lakeside, and the game was never played, but I watched the guys take batting practice, take infield practice, talk with Alan, showed him a couple of things that he could have his ball club work on, and then I ended up driving back. But the question was, did I see Matt LaChappa pitch? Yes, I did. He had a great curveball. Left-hander. It was a real treat to see Matt pitch. He was the best pitcher really in San Diego that year. I want to say they had another right-handed pitcher, and I can't remember. That's a long time ago. But they had Matt LaChappa, Steve Vickery, who was at that game, ended up leaving to go watch another game when that game got called off. But no, I saw Matt pitch. He had a great curveball. He had 2 things that I'll always remember. He had a great curveball, and he had an unbelievable pickoff move. He had a fantastic pickoff move. And, of course, Matt LaChappa is a young man that was in the Padre organization and had a heart attack when he was down in the bullpen. And luckily, his life was saved. And the Padres, to this day, every year, re-up his health insurance. And, it would have been fun to see where Matt would have gone with his baseball career. But the LaChappa family, very well-known family in San Diego, a lot of really, really good people. But, no, I did see him. I love going out to El Cap. That Hostetler Field. That's a great ballpark. I remember Eddie Olson, who just passed away this past year. Eddie, the first time I ever saw him, I was a junior in high school. I went down to watch my buddies at San Diego play in the CIF playoffs, 1975, and Eddie Olson's coaching third base. He had a catcher by the name of Mark Miller who signed with the Cincinnati Reds. His shortstop was a guy named Bobby Casanova. Mike Finch, who was a big left-handed pitcher, he ended up becoming a San Diego County sheriff, played at San Diego State. I've watched El Cap over the years, even though I grew up in the North County. I've always paid attention to El Cap because they've had great baseball players. Gary Armstrong, that played at San Diego State, was drafted by Detroit, great player. Jeff Bird, who pitched in the big leagues from El Cap. I could go on and on and on. And I never played against El Cap when I was a high school baseball player in any sport for that matter. But I've always enjoyed going down to Lakeside right next to the rodeo ring there. It's a lot of fun. And they got a beautiful ballpark. And I certainly wish my buddy Alan Strong, good young coach, it's his first year, and you go through those growing pains that first year. But you asked me about El Cap, and I gave you a lot of answers. Probably surprised how much I knew about El Cap. But I appreciate that. All right, that's going to wrap it up today. Good show. We went over an hour today. Thanks to Dylan Hernandez of the LA Times, great columnist. On Friday, we're going to take a look at the Colorado Rockies. The Padres invade Coors Field. Let's just hope the Padres can get a win tonight at Yankee Stadium and get that big rubber game. Let's hope Dylan Cease can be on his game, which has kind of avoided him so far this year, going against the hottest pitcher in Major League Baseball right now in 6-0, 1.01 ERA, Max Fried. Again, thanks for tuning in. Send your questions. Remember, subscribe, and like. But I want to hear your comments, and we'll play a bunch of them on the show on Friday. Until then, Coach John Kentera, have a great day, and go Padres.